Hey guys, it's Chels. I was really debating doing a video on my channel talking about this story because we made a podcast episode about it with my friend Cassidy, who I'll get into it. But we did a podcast in video version and on, podcasting platforms, and I felt that that was a great place to share this story.
The story we're referencing it happened March 8th, 2009. My dad was preaching and a man walked in and shot him. And so I was 12. And I remember that day, my mom waking me up to go to second service. My dad and sister were already at church and we were driving to church, and we passed an ambulance on the road. And ever since I was in third grade, we started praying for people in ambulances because we were in a bad car accident. So we prayed for the person in the ambulance, not knowing it was my dad in there. And so we drove to church and there were lights everywhere, police officers, firefighters, paramedics. And an officer asked us to pull to the side of the road. And I remember my mom asking what happened. And he said, "Ma'am, you need to pull to the side of the road." She said again, "I'm the pastor's wife. What happened?" And I just remember his face went white as a sheet. And that was the first time I really internalized, something bad happened. Then figured out my dad was shot and killed, and just a senseless act of violence. And that pivotal moment completely changed my life. I woke up that morning hearing the sounds of my dad getting ready. And that night I was cuddled in bed with my mom and sister trying to grapple with the fact that my dad was never coming home.
This also impacted other people's lives outside of just the immediate family, which we got to talk to Cassidy, who is the daughter of Fred, who was shot at our church, who was my pastor and our pastor and her dad. And I never thought to share this story with you guys because it has just happened. It happened so long ago. I was 11 years old when this happened, and just a lot of life has happened since then. But she came back to mind, Cassidy did, because we had so many memories together. We went to kids camp together. We were in a lot of groups together at, Sunday school, all the things growing up. And she was a year older than me. So at the time when my pastor was shot, her dad, I was 11 and Cassidy was 12. So very young, well before I ever did YouTube. And to kind of share my perspective on here, her whole story and everything is in our podcast, so I highly recommend you watch that as well. But for me, I was 11, I'm the oldest out of my family. I have two siblings. My sister is a year younger, my brother is 3 years younger, and we were all headed to church that morning when on March 8th, 2009, a gunman walked into our church and shot our pastor. At first, everybody thought it was a skit because our church at the time was really known for plays and acting, and we'd love to portray creatively stories of the Bible. And so I think everybody just kind of assumed that this had to be not real, Just imagine being in a scene like that. It's kind of hard to just think right away this is real. Somebody's actually doing this. But I wasn't in the room. We were on the way to church because this was the early morning service that this happened. So there were fewer people in the service. But my family was on the way, and I remember us pulling almost into the church, but we got told to park on the side of the road. And everybody was talking what's going on, what's happening. And there were just cars flooded on the sides of the road, and cars in the parking lot, and all the emergency vehicles out in the front. And everybody was talking about how the church was on lockdown. They were trying to figure out exactly what's going on and how to keep everybody safe, but we really didn't know at the time what was going on. And in my 11-year-old brain, it's really tough to process death in general, but also why somebody would murder someone, why somebody would want to kill somebody doing especially great work and with such a great heart. Our pastor, Pastor Fred, just had such an incredible heart for so many people and truly had the heart of a pastor. There's a lot of pastors out there that are great people and they have callings on their life, and it's very clear and evident that they're gifted. But I truly feel like there's very few that are actually called to pastor and are like great at shepherding people, like being in the trenches with them, praying with them, loving on them no matter what. And that was Fred. That's who he was. And so this man came in, and there were guys on the side of the aisles that were like, I think, security, and they had tackled him to the ground and stopped him from firing anymore. And anyway, the details of it kind of get a little blurry because, you know, you don't have that great of a memory from when you're younger, but I just remember it being something that like hit our church really hard for years, and just having like guest people come in and preach and speak, and everybody at the time was talking about it, like every news outlet, everything. And it just felt so strange. You had always heard about shootings happening, you had always heard about just violence happening around the world, but you never thought, oh, it could happen like right in my neighborhood, right where I worship God. Like, it's crazy. And so a lot of times I feel like it's a tendency to block out, like psychologically block out the bad that's happened in our life or things that are hard to deal with. And I think as a kid, I just couldn't really process it very well, or just didn't really think to. But I just remember my mom really looking up to and talking about Fred's wife and how she was just so forgiving and loving. But as you get to listen to our podcast with Cassidy, her daughter, you'll see that it was definitely a challenge and hard for them to walk through something like that. And on the outside, it can seem like somebody has things figured out and like they're getting through it, but there's a lot that they had to process through. And it's been 14 years since this has happened, and so a lot of life has happened. But I just look at that family now and I see how they're living lives on purpose. Like Cassidy is doing incredible work to stop human trafficking at war zones. So as we're talking about war and all the stuff's happening in the world right now with Ukraine, it really makes you think like, wow, you know, the work that she's doing is insane and amazing. And I'm going to link that below, by the way. If you guys have a heart for that and you want to get involved, there's so many ways to do that. So I'm going to link that. Make sure to check it out. But I look at that family and I just say that is a testimony of God's goodness and grace and love, and him really holding their hand and walking through that time. And I just thank God for how he's really carried that church, because I'm not a part of the church in Illinois anymore, but as the global church, anytime tragedy strikes, like, we all hurt. It just moves me to want to get involved and want to challenge you guys to do something incredible with your life. Like, be the hands and feet of change for your community and for other communities around the world. God's given you a heart, a unique heart, so just act on it. And I love seeing that happen in Cassidy's life, in her mom's life, in their family. I just think it's so cool that they came to mind a few weeks ago and we got to have this conversation. So I'm going to link the podcast down below. There's a whole video as well, but I just wanted to share a little bit of that story. If you're struggling with forgiveness and healing, there's hope. I just want you to know that. The organization that Cassidy actually works for is called Lift Up the Vulnerable. I have it like pulled up here. They're not asking me to speak about this. I just asked her simply, hey, what's on your heart? What are you working on that we can give a voice to, that we can give a platform to? And she shared this with me and I was like, whoa, I've never heard of something like that before. I hear about anti-human trafficking and anti-sex trafficking, but anti-trafficking on all fronts at war zones. So much evil happens at war zones. I don't want to explain the whole thing, but go to the website and do a deep dive I promise you'll be inspired. But I love y'all. Thank you for listening and watching this video. A much more lighthearted video next, but thank you again for listening in today. All right, peace.